Hello and welcome everyone to the Historic Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. My name is Andrew Medina. I am member number 1212 and I'm so glad to be your host for the evening. We got another great program coming at you tonight. I'm joined by the one and only Andrea Lankford to talk about her adventures on the Pacific Crest Trail. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Welcome, Andrea. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
Well, before we get started, I just have to ask, Andrea, do you go by Andy?
I do go by Andy.
Well, I do too. So there's two Andys on stage tonight.
You got buy one, get one free tonight.
Exactly. And Andrea's book, for everyone in the audience, is Trail of the Lost. I have it here, available in fine bookstores everywhere. It's a fantastic read, everyone. I got through it like real quick, in the matter of just a couple days. Once you start it, you can't stop it. So we're going to talk about that tonight. But, this story gets a little bit intense at times, isn't that right?
Yeah, I know I have some hikers here in the audience today, and I have to warn you, this story might scare you. It certainly scared me, and like many people here, I'm not the type that frightens easily.
Sure. Well, before we get into all that, let's hear a little bit more about your background and what makes you so, uniquely qualified to tell these stories.
Well, first off, if anybody's hearing an accent, I was born in Tennessee. That's where that comes from. And when I was a kid, my dad would take me hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
Beautiful.
So I love the outdoors. I loved animals. And I got a degree in forestry. My first job out of college was a seasonal park ranger position at Cape Hatteras National Seashore in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. And what was that experience like?
The job was a lot more complicated and stressful than I thought. I was what they call a protection ranger.
Stressful, okay.
Yeah. And a protection ranger, that comes from the park ranger credo. And that's protect the park from the people, protect the people from the park, and protect the people from each other.
Now that's an interesting set of oaths. I imagine it must be kind of difficult to uphold all of those at the same time at times.
Yes, a park ranger could get pulled in a lot of different directions. And as a protection ranger, I had law enforcement authority. I wore a gun on my hip. I also did search and rescue. I did emergency medicine. I was a medic. Mm-hmm. I also did wildland firefighting and structural firefighting. So that's a lot of different hats for one person to wear. Yeah,
and being in such remote areas all the time, it can get pretty dangerous, even to the most experienced of professionals like you, isn't that right?
Yes, it can. I actually lost two friends to the job. Mm-hmm. One was John Etheridge. He was a park naturalist, and he fell off a cliff while leading a guided hike in Zion National Park. And I also lost a dear employee of mine. His name was Kel Schaefer, and he died in an airplane crash on Mount Denali when he was only 25 years old.
Oof. That's very difficult. And so I remember reading in your book, you say that you've seen the effect that nature's wrath has on people who get lost, who get, and have subsequently found. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective. Do you see it as a punishment of sorts?
Well, a park ranger, you love the park, and it's your church often, mm-hmm. But it is also a scary God because it's so beautiful, but you see it kill people. Absolutely. And, for a park ranger, what happens is you have your average park visitor. They come to the national park, and they think it's Disneyland, right? Mm-hmm. But after a while, at one of these big Western parks, if you're a park ranger, it feels more like you're working in Jurassic Park.
Okay.
So you got a different perspectives there that sometimes cause some conflict.
Sure. And so how long were you a ranger at Hatteras?
I worked at Cape Hatteras 2 years, and then I went to Zion National Park in Utah from there.
Okay. So you didn't get further out west, did you?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, eventually you got to the PCT, but like...
Well, I wanted to work these big Western crazy parks. Right. I wanted the scenery and I wanted the challenge. Uh-huh. So from Zion National Park, I went to Yosemite here in California.
Okay. Yeah.
And then from Yosemite, I went to the Grand Canyon. And you know what they say about the Grand Canyon?
What's that?
It chews up park rangers and spits them out. And that's what happened to me, unfortunately.
Okay, so what happened that caused you to get burnt out?
All these tragedies I was responding to, I did more body recoveries than I can remember. I think it's 30 or more. And just all the politics, also the bureaucracy.
Sure.
And even to this day, park rangers are overworked, understaffed, and underpaid. Mm-hmm. So after 12 years, I wanted to leave the job. I was burned out.
And so how did you go about recovering from
Well,
burnout?
I did something some people might find ironic. I hit the trail. I went back east and I hiked the Appalachian Trail solo from Georgia to Maine.
Real quick aside, I recently heard two people arguing about the right way to pronounce that mountain range. How did you pronounce it just now?
Well, if you're from the south, you say Appalachian.
Yeah, and so the people I heard arguing called it Appalachian and Appalachian. And
that one I haven't heard.
That one's right out. Yeah,
but I think the Appalachian or Appalachian are both correct.
Yeah. So tell us about hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Now, I did it in 1999, and this was before smartphones.
Cell phones,
and some people had cell phones, but we looked down upon them. And I'm glad I got to do the trail before a cell phone.
Why's that?
Well, I think it made me feel more isolated. I wanted to feel isolated from the mainstream and, escape civilization.
So how do you think cell phones and later smartphones have impacted trail hiking?
Well, today you can get on and see almost moment by moment. We're going to talk about the Pacific Crest Trail soon, and you can get on Facebook and watch them every day and hear about their journey and see videos and photographs of it. So that can be fun, but it's also, it makes it seem more accessible to us.
Right. And, as you hiked it by yourself, right?
The Appalachian Trail, yes.
Yeah, and so as a woman hiking in the late 90s, were you at all worried about what could happen?
No, for me, hiking the Appalachian Trail was a relatively safe experience. I also found it therapeutic. I was in a funk when I went out there, and I felt healed from it. It brought me back to why I love nature so much in the first place.
That's great. And so between your hike on the Appalachian Trail and then your time that led to this book, you went on some other adventures. What are some of those?
I did. I kayaked from Miami to Key West. Me and another woman, Beth Overton, we were the first people to through bike the Arizona Trail corridor.
Oh, wow.
And I also cycled from just north of Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay along the Dalton Highway.
That's an intense one.
It was great, though.
But so, why'd you stop?
Well, I had to make a living.
The adventurer's bane, money.
Right, of course. So I went back to school and became a registered nurse.
Okay. And so how long were you a nurse for before, you got involved with some of the cases in this book?
Let's see, I was a nurse for almost 10 years. So in 2017, I'm busy working as a nurse, but I hear about this really odd case of a young man who disappeared while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in Southern California.
And who was that?
His name was Chris Sylvia.
Okay.
He was 28 years old, and he went missing in San Diego County near Warner Springs, for those who are familiar with the area.
Now, you were pretty experienced when you did your hike. Was he experienced when he did his?
I would call him a intermediate hiker. He had done 11 days on the Appalachian Trail, so he had some experience as a backpacker.
And real quick, what sets, a beginner hiker versus an intermediate versus someone like you?
A novice, a beginner is someone that's never backpacked before. An intermediate to me would be someone who's at least done a 5-night overnighter, a time or two.
Okay.
And then to me, an expert would be somebody who's through hiked for weeks or months.
Okay. So Chris Sylvia was an intermediate level hiker.
Yes, that's where I would put him.
And what year was he? Did he go missing?
He disappeared in 2015, February.
Interesting.
And something major was hitting the Pacific Crest Trail right at that same time. You know what it is, Andy?
Well, Andy, let's kick it out to the audience. Folks, what do you think was happening at the end of 2014 that might have impacted the Pacific Crest Trail in 2015? Right? Really, raise your hand. We'll take answers.
I can give a hint when it's needed.
Lance?
I'm saying weather.
Weather? Okay, interesting.
Cartels?
So I heard cartels in the back there. Anyone else? That's not it. All right, I think we need that hint, Annie.
Okay, it came by way of Hollywood.
All right, Hollywood. Hey, right you are.
Exactly. In December 2014, the movie starring Reese Witherspoon, Wild, was released. So in February 2015, we were all going to this movie, and a lot of us were reading the book,
Yeah.
which is based on Wild, the memoir by Cheryl Strayed.
Right.
And that book struck a nerve. Now, Cheryl Strayed was a young woman. She was struggling. She has had problems with addiction and
Yeah.
struggling with the death of her mother. She didn't have a lot of backpacking experience, and she hit the Pacific Crest Trail in 1994 seeking spiritual growth and redemption.
Right.
So this memoir, that story, inspired a lot of people. So the numbers of people attempting to through hike the Pacific Crest Trail skyrocketed. So much so that the Pacific Crest Trail Association had to start issuing permits. They implemented a system to try to, keep the use to only a certain amount of people per day.
Interesting. So the impact of Wild is it just encouraged a bunch of people to start hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. Are these people like experienced, or are they like her?
Yeah, they call it the Wild effect, and not everybody was happy with this. I had one disgruntled through hiker say to me, there's an awful lot of strayeds out there. And so he's referring to these sort of lost souls who come to the Pacific Crest Trail without a lot of experience. But, sometimes I think the book gets a bad rap because also social media has played a huge role. Just we talked about Facebook, right? And Instagram
Sure.
and YouTube. It's made the trail seem more accessible.
Okay.
And so we've just got more and more people coming out into the backcountry and trying to through hike a major trail like the Pacific Crest Trail.
And so what do you think, if anything, has been lost by the sort of advent of social media and, with media like Wild?
I don't know if so much been lost. I mean, it's more crowded. You're going to have more company when you go out there. But you could argue some things have been gained, because we can learn
Right.
by watching others. And also we're going to talk about searching for missing people. There's a lot of evidence on social media that could be used to try to solve a case.
Did you notice at that time any sort of changes in the type of person who would go hiking the Pacific Crest Trail?
Well, I think so. I think we do have people who are less experienced. The trail feels more accessible.
Right.
One through hiker, the way he put it, he said, there used to be only hikers on the trail. Now it's all of humanity.
Interesting. Okay.
And sometimes some bad actors are driving the trail.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I hope we get into that. But what about the mentality? The thing about Wild is, Cheryl went on that hike to find herself, right? She went for some kind of spiritual awakening aspect. Was that more common or less common beforehand?
I think I could say it's more common. It's always been a part of it. But,
Right.
The first people, and it was mostly men in the beginning, I think they were looking more for a wilderness challenge. They were wanting to challenge themselves. And so, no, I think that we have changing expectations of what we want from our wilderness experience.
Right. And so, coming back now to Chris Sylvia, why did he start on the trail?
Chris Sylvia was 28 years old, and he was also in a funk. He was unemployed. He was living in a friend's apartment.
Right.
His heart had been broken by some women. And so he was going out to the PCT to get his head straight.
And so, walk us through his story a little bit up until when he went missing.
Now, one thing I want to say about Chris Sylvia is once I learned about his background, he immediately reminded me of another case I'd worked at the Grand Canyon in 1995 of another young man in his 20s who was struggling and living in a friend's apartment, unemployed. He went down the Grand Canyon in 1995 and vanished. And I was a supervisory park ranger there, tasked with finding him, running the search effort. I worked hard we threw everything out at helicopters, dogs, you name it. Worked hard for days, but I failed. Me and my rangers did not find this guy. And I had to tell the father that we would eventually be winding down the search effort. This was obviously very emotional for him, and that was hard for me.
Yeah.
That case haunted me for decades, and it was still haunting me when I heard about Chris Sylvia in 2017.
Sure. And so, when you're looking for someone and you're throwing everything you can at it and nothing's coming up, how do you decide, to start drawing down the search or even calling it off?
When you're official, there's a lot of issues. One is funding. These searches can get very expensive.
Sure.
Another is staffing. Like I said, park rangers are understaffed. We have Grand Canyon's a busy park. People are in trouble every day.
Yeah.
And so you need to spend those, it's like triage. You need to put those resources where they can do the most good.
Right.
And so eventually every search has to, if they don't find the missing person, it has to wind down. And this is hard for the searcher. I call it the searcher's burden. If you have a case that you didn't solve, you'll never forget about it.
Sure. And would it be fair to say that, that burden, obviously it haunted you for decades, and would you say that there's some guilt, associated with not being able to give that family closure?
Yes, for sure. I felt something like guilt. It's, it bothered me a lot.
And so what do you do with that guilt that you feel?
Well, I think what happened in this case is I saw that the authorities appeared to be giving up on the Chris Sylvia case, 2017. I felt bad for his family, so I called his brother and mother and I asked for their blessing to open a pro bono investigation into his disappearance.
And they gave the okay, right?
Yes, they were happy to have that.
And so, that's one of the main cases in this book. Another one is the Chris Fowler case.
Yeah, so what happened, I started trying to find Chris Sylvia, right? Well, I looked for patterns, what's going on, and right away I learned that 2 other young men had vanished while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And so about a little over a year after Chris Sylvia vanished in Southern California, a 34-year-old named Chris Fowler, his trail name was Sherpa, he vanished from the trail in Washington State on October 2016.
Right. Okay. And so I want to ask the question, but there's one more sort of player in this, in this book that we need to talk about, and that's David O'Sullivan. So what was David O'Sullivan's story?
David O'Sullivan, 6 months after Chris Fowler vanished, David O'Sullivan vanished from the trail in April 2017 in Southern California, about 52 trail miles north from where Chris Sylvia disappeared. Yeah. And that was near Idlewild, for those of you here in Southern California.
Sure.
So, and David O'Sullivan was from Ireland.
Right.
He was a happy guy, happy introvert. He was a smart guy. He had a degree in arts and philosophy from Cork College, and he was a novice. He was definitely a novice.
Okay.
So we got Chris Fowler. Now, Chris Fowler, I would call him an expert hiker when he vanished in Washington, because he's already gone 2,000 miles.
Yeah.
And he was suffering from a condition called border fever.
Now, what is border fever?
Now, border fever to a through hiker is like summit fever to a mountain climber. Okay, so this through hiker, he's gone 2,000 miles, right? So he's the heck bent to reach the border at all costs, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's a fever. I've got to get to the border.
You just got to do it. Those last few miles sometimes.
And as you mountaineers know, this can cause some problems and fatalities when people are operating under that mindset of border fever, summit fever.
Sure. So we have our beginner hiker, our intermediate hiker, and our advanced hiker. I think that's really interesting, thing to point out, is just that there is no skill ceiling here. Anyone can go missing. And, no one is sort of safe from something happening.
I would agree with that. I think if you're an advanced hiker, you shouldn't get complacent. You realize this could happen to you as well.
Sure. And so all these 3 men went missing around the same time. Did they have anything else in common?
Yeah, so they were one each year, 3 years in a row. They were all single. They were all fit. One interesting tidbit that I found out is all 3 of them were carrying a book or reading a book before they disappeared about characters who disappeared in some form or fashion.
Do you remember what the books were?
Well, of course. So Chris Fowler was reading The Wanderer. Some of you might know that, about a disillusioned actor who kind of absconded to Tahiti with his kids, and angered his ex-wife. And then David O'Sullivan was reading After Dark, which is a fiction story, and it's about abysses that suck people up. And Chris Sylvia Now, I learned this through my investigation, but he was reading Siddhartha, which
Interesting.
is a novel with Buddhist themes by Hermann Hesse. And
Yeah.
it's about leaving your possessions behind and going away from your family and basically disappearing from civilization.
And that was a pretty big theme with him. I remember, there's like a story about a hiker's box with his stuff in it.
Yes,
And the last place he was seen was at a Buddhist temple.
yes, you're right.
And so there's just some question. And I remember there was a question of, did he really go missing or did he not want to be found?
The Chris Sylvia case, and he's the 28-year-old who was in a funk, remember? That case is the one that perplexes me the most because there are so many possibilities. And he vanished from an area where you don't get lost. And there's not a lot of fall zones. The weather's not that bad. And so that case leaves some open-ended theories of what might have happened to him.
Right, including some interesting ones that we'll touch on later. So one of the things I want to talk about before we get too much further is about David O'Sullivan. Like you said, Irish guy, and I just feel like that presents even more sort of layers and challenges to finding him.
It did, and even for him, he was a novice. He was a disciplined guy. He had a black belt in karate, but he confused American pounds with English stones, and so he packed gear that was twice heavier than what he needed to.
Okay.
So in Southern California, he had to go through a procedure known as the shakedown, and that's when you go to an outfitter and they lighten your load at the same time they're lightening your wallet when you buy better gear. Yeah.
Well, it's all just extra weight anyway
Yeah,
at
sure.
that point. But yes, so there's that as well. But I'm more talking about like in the attempt to search for him. His family is far away. It's hard for them to have real influence on authorities and then even on amateur searches. Like, even with the best intentions, it's still hard, when someone's half the world away.
Yes, his parents, Con and Carmel Sullivan, I write more about them in the book, great people. But they're at a distinct disadvantage because they don't even understand some of the legal authorities and the jurisdictional issues in the United States, right? And so they tried very hard to open a missing persons case on their son when he was overdue, but it took weeks even for them to get a case started.
Yeah. And, on the other end of that, I feel like it's unfortunately a little bit more difficult for police departments to get motivated to find an international hiker because not only do they have the problems inherent with other searches, like they have limited resources, there's many jurisdictions across the PCT that, no one quite knows like whose jurisdiction is where or who's in charge. But also it's like, this is not a constituent, this is not a member of your community. At the end of the day, you're helping someone, sure, but it's not someone who is local, who will like reflect well on you.
Yeah, you don't have voters
Exactly.
pounding on the sheriff's door.
As many, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a little cynical, but I think it does happen. And also, I call it the hot potato effect. When a hiker is going through several jurisdictions, counties, cities, federal, state,
Yeah.
it's easy for the agency to go, it's not my case, it's not my case, it's not my case.
Right.
So they can toss it around like a hot potato, and that's a delay in initiating a search.
Yeah, and that's just one of the things I noticed, just the hot potato of jurisdiction, especially with federal jurisdiction. And I remember reading that they don't even get involved unless it's a high-profile case.
Not in the U.S. Forest Service doesn't really see it as their mission. Now, when I was a park ranger, National Park Service, that's your case.
Sure.
You take it. But also the FBI does have some jurisdiction on public lands, but they're not going to take the case unless it's a big news media story.
Right. So tell me about you getting involved with the amateur searching scene on the PCT.
Yeah, so one thing I did is I joined the Facebook missing hiker groups, and that is a whole nother world.
Sure.
To me, it was like walking in a saloon in the Wild Wild West with a bunch of rowdy characters, including trolls and wannabes and catfishers who pretend to be something they're not. But I also saw something magical happen. I'd see some quiet heroes walk into this saloon, right, on Facebook, and these were people with pure intentions who truly just wanted to help this family find their missing loved one.
Absolutely.
And the one that got my attention the first and the most is a woman named Kathy Tarr. And Kathy Tarr was a retired pharmacy manager from Walgreens.
Right.
She had no experience in law enforcement search and rescue like I did, but she was near me in age. We were both in our early 50s at the time. I saw that she had spent the summer in 2017 looking for Chris Fowler in Washington, and she announced on Facebook she was now going to drive all the way to Southern California and initiate a case for a search for David O'Sullivan.
Oh, wow, okay.
And she was going to be doing that the same week I was initiating my search for Chris Sylvia. So I contacted Kathy through Facebook and begged her to meet me for dinner so we could compare notes. And I was really impressed by her. And you could say when I met Kathy, the book was born because I was hooked. I wanted to know what happened to these missing men. I wanted to help Kathy help their families. I wanted to learn more about amateurs getting involved with the missing hiker case.
Right, yeah.
And also study more into this effect on social media, on hiker culture, and missing
Sure.
persons investigation.
One of the things that I was struck with is there's a couple times in the book where you say you need to be less cop and more hiker. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a point during my investigation where I realized my experience as a hiker, through hiker on the AT, was needed for me to investigate these cases properly. And I even worried that the authorities, if they didn't realize they're working at a disadvantage, that they don't understand hiker culture and hiker lifestyle.
Sure. So going back to Facebook then, like what is some of the culture around, missing hiker Facebook groups?
Well, like I said, I told you about all the wild characters, but
Sure.
there's also a lot of good bonding and then using Facebook as an investigative tool.
Okay.
So one story I tell in the book is how we'd get sightings all the time. People would claim that they had seen one of these guys. And in one case in particular, there was a bear hunter who claimed he'd seen Chris Fowler.
Right.
And they actually shifted the search effort based on his credible sighting. But Kathy and another character in the book named Morgan Clements, they found proof that he had deceived, that he was not on the trail seeing Chris Fowler when he said he was, and they found that on Facebook. And they were able to convince the authorities to investigate further based on that.
Wow. But those bear hunters were not the only time a, shall we say, less than credible source offered to help find, a missing person. Can you tell us about the Dr. Vass, is his name?
Yes.
Is he even a doctor? I don't even know.
He's a PhD.
That's right, okay.
Yes. There is a story in the book about Dr. Vass has a grave detection machine, and he believes that he could find your missing loved one using your fingernail clippings, that it could track down your DNA. And so I go into what problems ensues from his expertise being used on a case.
Real quick, I want to ask the audience for their opinion again. This man claims to be able to use like quantum frequency, quantum energy to detect a loved one using nothing more than like a little bit of their DNA, like finger clippings or like hair, some hair. The way that the device works, he says it is like it can point the direction using two L-shaped rods. What does that sound like to you? You can just yell it out. Dowsing. They said it, not me. So when you went to go track down the lead that he provided, I think it's a great story about the sort of impact that some of these types of, leads can have, not just on family, but also on the searchers too. It's like, it's not all harmless. You sustained an injury.
Yes.
Chasing down that
Yes,
lead.
I did. It's a bit of a spoiler for any of you who haven't read the book yet.
Sorry.
Yep, but so you could wait, go back and read the book, come back.
Yeah.
But searching is risky. We're going into environments to find people. Risk is involved with that. And because of that lead, and it was tormenting the family, David O'Sullivan's family, who still believed that maybe Dr. Vass's lead was viable, I hiked in to try to resolve that lead, and in the process, I injured myself in the wilderness and had to spend 3 days out there with what later turned out to be a fractured ankle.
Oof. Yeah, and you had to have surgery to fix that, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
I was in denial. I just told myself it was sprained, and I hiked out with some assistance by myself. But once I went to a physician, it was proved to be broken. And so, yeah, I had to have a titanium plate and 5 screws put in.
And so that's the type of thing that gets people killed, And so what kind of other things get people killed on the trail?
So 16 thru hikers have died thus far while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and it usually involves water. We've had 4 that slid off an icy slope.
Oh, wow.
2 were washed away in a raging river. We've also had some exposure deaths, heat, illness, and 2 fall off the cliff. We actually had 2 that were hit by a car.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Is there any difference in the sort of gender demographics of those deaths?
Well, I write about something called the fear-gender paradox.
And what is that?
Yeah, what happens is women, we tend to fear the outdoors more. At least we're giving a lot of messages that, you're crazy to go out there and backpack alone, right? But the statistics show that a solo male is less likely to survive a perilous encounter in outdoors than a solo female. Now, Mark Twain, what does he say? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. So statistics are going to change. But the theory is, the reason for that I believe, is that women are given this message, we should be so afraid, so that when we go out there, we're more cautious.
Okay.
So men are just getting in trouble more because they're being less cautious. And I could see those stats level out as women become more confident and go out in the outdoors more.
Interesting. So because women think they have more to fear, they take more precautions and they're more likely to survive. So they have actually less to fear in a weird way.
That's why they call it the fear-gender paradox.
Huh. So men are overconfident and get themselves killed. All right. Sounds good. So let's talk a little bit about the families of these missing men. So can you tell us a little bit about Sally Fowler in particular?
Yeah, Sally Fowler, that's Chris Fowler's stepmom, and she is a gung-ho, very charismatic, warm individual. And she traveled all the way from Ohio to Washington to start searching for her son. And I write about this in the book. I got close to her. I was interviewing her on a weekly or monthly basis. And one thing these families are going through, you have a loved one go missing, it's one of the worst things that can happen to you.
Sure.
Because you don't know what happened to them, you don't know if they're alive or dead. There's also legal issues. Let's say it's your breadwinner that went missing. You can't get at life insurance, for example. But also emotionally, just not knowing what happened. They call it ambiguous loss, and you can't grieve properly. It's a horrible situation to be in.
Yeah. And one of the things that I really took away from this book is just this cycle that these families are in of hopelessness and then hope at a possible lead, and then they chase that lead down, and then it turns out to, be a false lead. And then you're back in and then you're back to hopelessness and even, sometimes despair of ever finding it again before that kind of dogged determination sets back in.
Yes, and that's something Sally Fowler's had to go through many times. They call it a hope hangover.
Hope hangover.
And so, yeah, they just get hope. It's an odd, weird, sick hope because it may mean your loved one is found dead, right? But you're just hoping this not knowing is going to end. And then if the lead ends up being, BS or wrong or a dead end, then their emotions crash and burn.
Yeah. And another interesting thing that you write about is resentment is the wrong word, but it's when you're helping someone find a loved one and you have a loved one missing yourself, when the other person finds it, there's almost this feeling of well, why do they get this closure and I don't? Why is my person still missing? How is that fair?
Yes, it's a very normal human reaction because they're suffering so much. And so when another family gets answers and gets to bury their loved one,
Yeah.
there will be a weird mixture of emotions that's hard for them. You know, you learn that someone has died, and then they think, well, maybe that's what happened to my loved one. So it's a horrible head thing to go through.
Sure. And so one thing that I'm interested in is, you know, all these cases sort of worked out, but like in the course of the book, you actually talk about a number of cases that you did solve and that turned out positively. So how did you choose to write about these 3 cases in particular?
Well, because that's what scared me, is you've got these 3 young men who are fit, and they disappear on the same trail. And hundreds of people, authorities, amateurs, were trying to find them, and nobody could find them. And with all our technology, I know the American wilderness is vast and treacherous. I know it's dangerous as much as anybody.
Yeah.
But the fact that we couldn't find them, and it left all these other theories out there,
Right.
like perhaps, you know, I talk about a kidnapper on the trail that kidnapped a thru hiker.
Yeah.
That's what scared me about this, that you could just vanish and people could search forever and still not find you.
Sure. I want to talk about that a little bit. Some of the things on the trail that may not kill you, but may make you unfindable. So kidnapping is one. Can you tell us about that story with Medic and Steel Magnolia?
Yes. So in 2018, we hear about a hiker, a woman goes missing on the Pacific Crest Trail. We kind of jump in and try to help. And we start to get messages that she's alive and she's fine. She's just trying to cut off from family, which is not uncommon on the Pacific Crest Trail. Well, fast forward a few months later, we hear she's escaped from this thru hiker she had got engaged to, who was going by Medic, and his name is James Perillo, and she had a broken rib. So he was kidnapping her, he was raping her, he was abusing her, allegedly. And the authorities arrested him briefly, and then they let him go. Turns out this guy has a long history of kidnapping women that goes way back to 1994 or even earlier.
Oh my gosh.
So he gets let loose. He goes back to the PCT. Of course, all the thru hikers, we call it the Tramily, the trail family. They're upset.
Right.
So I get on my Facebook group, Missing from the Pacific Crest Trail, and other people, and we post warnings. And so we're basically tracking this guy's whereabouts to let other hikers know. You know, he's a con man. He'd pretend to have cancer. He'd pretend he's in the Navy.
Right.
He's a dangerous guy,
Yeah.
though, very violent, abusive.
And so why do you think he could get away with it for so long without being arrested or jailed?
I think a lot of it is charm, and then he throws up a lot of dust. You know, he has like 50 aliases or something.
Right.
And he's also, he's uncanny how he could charm law enforcement and courts into letting him go.
So he can charm the police. Interesting. What about the 12 tribes?
Yeah, well, okay, this was a theory that I laughed off at first. You know, when someone goes missing, you hear, oh, maybe they joined a cult, right? Well,
Sounds silly at first, doesn't it?
it turns out that theory holds water because there is an actual for real cult called the 12 Tribes, a religious community, who actively recruit hikers. They see them as a recruitment pool.
Okay.
They think thru hikers are like them. Thru hikers are called the cult farmers. They're farmers, and they have delis. There's one in Vista, California. And they will send pairs of them on the trail. They call them walkers. And they'll go out and hand out pamphlets to hikers and try to entice them to come back to their farms, where maybe they could stay for a day or they could stay forever.
Forever. So for anyone thinking about hiking the PCT, what do these farmers look like?
Well, the men don't look a whole lot different than thru hikers. You know, they might be wearing a plaid shirt and have long hair and a beard, pulled back in a little ponytail. The women dress modestly. They're very, you know, clean cut and wholesome looking. They often have shiny blue eyes, that people tell me.
Is that a requirement?
I don't know. But I've eaten at their delis. They're not really that nefarious, but they are a bit manipulative and heavy-handed in recruiting, and they'll make you give up all your possessions, and you have to take another name,
Yeah.
and then they'll cut you off from family.
Right.
So it's a way, for someone to disappear.
So this is another theory you had for Chris Sylvia specifically.
Yes, he's the one that, I asked his family, and his brother said, yeah, he very much might join a cult. He would be susceptible to that.
Okay. So, yeah, this is just another thing. It's like along with that Buddhist temple idea. Maybe he just doesn't want to be found. That's a theory, right? Let's talk about psychics. In the book, you talk about how when you started investigating, all these psychics came out of the woodwork to talk about what they'd seen and try and help you find people. But what was interesting to me, you talk about one psychic in particular who I want to talk about, but what was sort of interesting to me is that they never asked for payment.
Not in my research. The psychics that Sally Fowler talked to and Kathy talked to, none of them asked for payment.
Right.
Now, disclaimer, I'm a skeptic. I'm a full-on skeptic.
Sure.
I do not believe in psychic ability, but I have some compassion toward it. I know sometimes it's helpful to the families, to listen to what a psychic says. But, I personally don't believe it can solve cases.
But there was one psychic who got pretty deeply involved with one of the searches, wasn't there?
Yes, Pam Coronado, and I consider Pam a friend. We don't always see eye to eye, but she was very dedicated. She impressed me because even though she uses her intuition and psychic ability to try to solve a case, she got obsessed with the David O'Sullivan case and went out and physically searched. And you don't hear often about that with the psychic, right? She goes out and searches for the person she's trying to find. And that led to some trouble for her.
It did. And in that chapter, I'm just like, you couldn't see this coming? Just saying. I won't say what it is, but just a little funny to me. One of the big themes, I think, in your book is sort of the failure of authorities. Would you be willing to talk about that a little bit?
Yes.
Or difficulties of authorities.
Yeah, and I have, on some levels, I have sympathies because I failed when I was authority, right? I failed to find a missing hiker. Yeah. But I tried. We tried.
Sure.
But sometimes they're maybe not trying as hard as I think they should, and they're not starting the investigation as soon. When a hiker goes missing, we were taught it should be considered an emergency. And so you should start asking questions right away, not trying to sweep it under the rug, so that you don't miss leads. I also, in the book, I write about clues that the authority missed. Oh, and you're talking about the group. These amateurs did solve some cases.
Yeah.
And I write about 3 of them that they either solved or helped solved.
And can we talk about those cases?
Well, the one I'm most excited about involves a groundbreaking cold case technique of trying to find a missing hiker.
Okay.
And it involves drones.
Right. Yeah. So what happened with that?
You can't send just any old drone pilot out there. These guys, Greg Knuckles, spearheads this group called Western States Aerial Search, based out of Utah. And they have a technique where they take these specialized drones with software and it flies a lawnmower grid over a search area, taking photographs all along the way. They fly as low as they can on the ground. So they capture thousands of images, and these images are sent to a group of people known as squinters.
Yes, and what do squinters do?
Now, the squinters are called that because they're squinting at computer screens all day. And they are scanning these images for clues. And do we have a slide? Okay, good, the slide is up,
Yes,
right?
we have a slide.
Okay. So one of my favorite squinters is Morgan Clements. And so when he gets a photograph like the one you see up there, this is an actual photograph from an actual search for a missing hiker. Now, does anybody see the white things in there? Yeah. Okay, those are bones. They're not human bones. I wasn't going to show you that, but these are burrow bones. it does represent what these squinters are looking for, and some of the cases that I've seen that they solve don't look a whole lot different than that when they found
Sure.
a human remains. So that's what they're looking for in these thousands of images.
And why is it people? Why can't it be some kind of machine or AI program?
The AI's just not there yet. There's a study out there where they pitted AI software with human squinters, and it was a simulated
Sure.
missing hiker.
Of course.
And the researchers were surprised to see that the humans not only found the remains better, they found it faster than the software. So there's just something about the human mind to date, maybe this will change, that's just better at, the recognition and being able to find these clues in these images. But they're slow, and the squinters, it's a burnout job.
Sure.
It's a headache job.
I enjoyed that story a lot because, in this world of everyone talking about, oh, AI is going to be able to do everything that humans can do, but better soon. There's just like this little bit of me that's just like, maybe not this.
The humans won this one.
We got this one, guys. So I guess we've sort of touched on it at this point, but sort of what good has come from these cases? Because the cases themselves are very difficult, and so what good has come from them?
Yes. We talked about the groundbreaking search techniques. We also, this group of amateurs, we became friends, and this supportive, positive environment. Kathy, I'm really proud of her. She started a nonprofit called the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation. And I encourage people to go visit them online, maybe even join their newsletter so you could see what they're up to, because they're the ones that run some of these drone searches where they've found people. They also have a peer support group that they use to help these families who are still don't know what happened to their loved one. And so that's a good way to bring meaning to all this for the families whose loved one didn't get found. At least some good things did come of this. Also, they're promoting safety measures to prevent hikers from going missing in the first place.
What kind of safety measures are those?
Well, they have an inReach giveaway, Garmin inReach, your locator device, where's your locator device? Every year they give away these Garmins to through hikers. They do it through a lottery system. They also have a microspike program where they give, the traction device for ice on your shoes, where hikers can get them at a real discounted rate before they try to hike San Jacinto, where there's a problem with hikers slipping off the ice.
Sure. I want to do something with you now. Pretend I'm thinking of hiking the Pacific Coast Trail. Pretend you're talking to me. I'm thinking about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail for the first time. Give me a piece of advice as if I were a beginner, an intermediate, and an expert hiker.
Well, I would say all three of you need to have an expedition mindset.
Okay.
Go out there, have fun, have some spiritual growth, meditate, walking, meditation.
Sure.
But also have an expedition mindset like a mountaineer would have who is going to climb Mount Everest, right? Be prepared, realize you're going to have all kind of weather conditions. You're going to have wildfire, you're going to have ice, you're going to have heat, chance of dehydration. So be flexible and adapt to the changing conditions. You can die out there and you can go lost and go missing, and that's just horrible for your family.
Sure. Okay. So do you think that there's a piece of sort of common knowledge that gets lost the more advanced someone gets? Like the more advanced people say like, oh, I don't need to do this anymore. Like I already know it, or they take something they take for granted, and that leads to people getting in trouble.
Yeah, I think sometimes I'm even guilty of that, but I think advanced hiker, we can just get complacent. So we just, what I've seen is the novice, the intermediate, and the advanced, they'll make the same mistake, but for different reasons.
So like, can you give an example of that?
Well, like the novice might not even take water in the desert or will lose their sun hat.
Right.
The expert will try to do too many miles, will feel like, well, I'll make it, I won't have to take that much weight of water.
Well, thank you, Andrea. For the folks on YouTube, we have a picture of the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation homepage if you want to go visit them. It's also on the screens here for folks. And I'm sure now we would love to take some questions from the audience if you have a few minutes.
Andrea, I'm going to start Lance Miller with 1222. What's your methodology when you go out to finding a hiker? I mean, is it a grid search, or is it a more psychological decision point type search? What are you looking for?
I'm a trained professional searcher. So the professional searcher is trying to do a bunch of things all at once. And one thing is called the hasty search. And this is where you send some runners or a helicopter or both to go to a high probability area to try to find the person right away. At the same time you're doing that, you got to assign an investigator, and that's where you get into the head part of it, for them to interview friends and family, look for clues, abandoned car, whatever, to study the individual and get a lost person profile on them.
Sure.
Also, there's the third thing that's real important to do right away is containment. You want to contain your search area by either a roadblock or a trail block or a sign trap, where you could watch for footprints. And there's more to it, but those are the three things you need to do all at once when you have a hot case.
Okay. And a hot case is what?
It's just come in, we've got a missing hiker.
Gotcha.
He's overdue, he didn't show up for work.
Gotcha. Okay. In the back, Sharon. Hi.
Hi, I'm Sharon LaBelle, member number 1247. Yay! One of the first women, yes. So I'm a hiker on the PCT and Appalachian Trail. I consider myself an expert hiker. So I have seen a lot of these weird people hiking the trails. And actually Bob and I ran across somebody on the Appalachian Trail who we overheard a phone conversation with this young man with his father saying, I need you to come off the trail and take a job. He said, well, I want to do this one more time. And so Bob and I talked to him and said it was his second or third time he had done the complete Appalachian Trail up from Atlanta all the way to Maine and back 3 times. And his father was really, asking him, please, son, come and take this job, come off the trail. We as expert hikers, what would you recommend to someone like us if we ran across someone in this situation to actually be an advocate for that person and talk to them?
Yeah, so, I guess it's a free country. If they want to stay on the trail and they're not breaking any laws, I probably wouldn't get into it. That's between him and his dad, right? Is his dad paying for the trip or not? But
he could have been one of those missing kids and we didn't know it.
Oh, well, okay, well, my advice for someone, you see anything odd on the trail you think might be related to a missing person case, photograph if you can. I mean, be safe, photographing people, you don't want to upset them. But if you can get a photograph of a person or an item that you found in that GPS location, write notes, what they were wearing, what they said, date and time. And then you can report that to the authorities. If the authorities don't respond, you can report it to the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation. And so that whoever's going to follow up has enough details to use that lead to the best of its ability.
Building on that a little bit, what are some sort of easy, non-invasive things that any of us can do if we're hiking the trail and we come across someone on it to just keep a documentation of who they are and where we saw them in case they do go missing, we can be helpful in the subsequent investigation.
Yeah, one great thing on the trail is trail registers. These are these logbooks all along the trail. They're kind of like summit registers, right?
Right.
And so anytime you're in there, if you write down, that you were there, that helps people track you down. They can know where you last were. Also, if you keep journals, you could just maybe write what somebody was wearing, or what they look like when you had a conversation with them, if you're writing that down. And that's because that journal could be a good document to help in investigation.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a kind of Yosemite-inspired question about one of the most famous thru hikers, and that's John Muir. And every time I'm up in Yosemite, and I'm put myself in the basic category, but I keep coming across stories, because we all read stories, John Muir getting caught out on a cold night, and he had to dance all night to stay warm and not die. And on one hand, the amateur hiker in me thinks, I'll just have that in my toolkit and whip it out. I can do anything. And I'm guessing that can get a lot of people in trouble. And so I guess a broad question about, what sort of myths can we buy into that get us to bite off more than we can chew, or any response you have to that story?
To the John Muir, well, there you go. That's an example of an expert, being complacent. That's a perfect example.
Right.
There's a survival rule of threes, and, it's, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, but it's 3 hours without shelter in a bad and, a harsh environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, hypothermia is a scary thing, and so to take serious.
Yeah.
So that's my advice to the expert hiker, is potential that you could die within 3 hours if you're in a harsh environment.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm David. I'm a guest here.
Welcome
the
back.
biggest question I have is, what do you feel is the biggest theories for the missing people, like based off all your experience? What do you think those theories could be, and why?
In the book, I go through all the, say when you're a ranger and you get an overdue hiker, you have a lot of suspects of what might have happened, and not all of them are human.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go through all the possible theories.
Yeah.
As a park ranger, I've seen what nature can do, so that tends to be my go-to, that it's some sort of environmental thing.
Right.
I will, in the book, I do talk, though, about people on the trail who commit homicide on the trail. So sometimes there is murder on the Pacific Crest Trail, bad actors who are capable of murdering somebody.
Sure.
Also, you got mountain lions. There, some of you may have heard in the news just a couple weeks ago, a mountain lion killed a young man in El Dorado County, and that's not really that far from the Pacific Crest Trail.
Mm-hmm.
And, we talked about the cult. Suicide is discussed in the trail. So there's a lot of different suspects. Now, like I said, I tend to think that 2 of the guys probably got in trouble with the environment, the snow most likely.
Yeah.
But the Chris Sylvia case perplexes me, and I have a real hard time picking one theory for him.
Sure.
Hi, Rich Mayfield, member 1211. Did you ever get involved in any cases where someone went to the trail to escape or evade justice or otherwise go on the lam?
Yes, there's the Benjamin Ashley. There was a manhunt there near Jawbone Canyon.
Okay.
I believe that was 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And he murdered a guy in a cabin there, and also took some young men hostage.
Mm-hmm.
And that manhunt ended in a shootout with police. And Benjamin Ashley killed himself in that shootout.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one example. Also, there's a story of a rapist who's convicted of rape, who was hiding out on the PCT in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And you said about escape. I also tell a story just about a young man, an innocent young man, who went out on the trail, he said, to be closer to God. And he ended up dying out there in a way, that is, he obviously was trying to escape civilization.
Hi, Andy. I'm Elizabeth. On the Pacific Crest Trail, a part of that culture is hitchhiking. Has there been any theories that could have played a part in any of those deaths?
Yes. There, especially with maybe Chris Fowler or David O'Sullivan, we don't know what route David O'Sullivan took from Idlewild, and there were reports that the mountain was dangerous, and so he might have tried to hitch around.
Right.
The other with Chris Fowler, there's I call it the Greenwater lead. He was seen in a tavern in Greenwater, Washington.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And if that sighting is accurate, most likely he got a ride from somebody from that tavern, and we don't know where he went from there.
Yeah, real quick, I want to talk about the difference between practical hikers and purist hikers. So what is the sort of difference? I think you touched on it just there. What's the sort of difference between those two?
Yeah, so with a through hiker, a purist is someone who wants to go from A to B, from south to north, without skipping any miles.
Right.
You're going to call it a practical hiker would be someone who has sometimes they're called yellow blazers because they're taking the road, right? The yellow blazing. They're going to skip sections for whatever reason, because they're tired, or for a practical reason is because there's a wildfire or a snowy summit that they don't want to cross. And that would actually be a smart thing to do.
Right.
Alan Felsing, 1094, sort of a two-part question. In listening to your stories, is the risk on the Pacific Coast Trail greater because from human or from nature? And has the Pacific Coast Trail gotten more dangerous over the years?
So on the Pacific Crest Trail, the risk is definitely more nature.
Right.
On the Appalachian Trail, I believe the risk is more human. There's been like over 11 people murdered, through hikers murdered on the Appalachian Trail. There's even more that aren't through hikers.
Yeah.
And my guess is that's because the Appalachian Trail is closer to civilization. The PCT is more remote.
Sure.
In general.
Sure.
And the other part to the question, give me that last part again.
Has it got more dangerous over the years?
I'm just going on my opinion, it's not more dangerous, but it is getting more challenging especially because of wildfire. And maybe because of climate change.
Right.
Because we got another big snow. It's snowing here up in my home in Sonora today in April, right?
Yeah.
So some of these climate issues are making the trail possibly more dangerous, but definitely harder for the through hikers. Some are even saying it's impossible to through hike it because of these weather events.
Do you think it's partially too that, because of the wild effect, like you get more inexperienced hikers on the trail who are just more subject to risk than in years past?
Yes, both that and just more. You have more hikers on the trail, you're going to have more people get in trouble.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Ortega. I'm a guest. It's my first time here.
Welcome.
And I'm also a PCT through hiker. And my question was about what can the PCTA do to help alleviate some of that risk, because the permit system has a cap per day, and I think that in a way puts some pressure on hikers to go through the trail in that window of time. So what measures could be implemented?
So the PCTA, the Pacific Crest Trail Association, that permit system, I think there's some valid concern because they say 50 people per day, and so a bunch of people trying to get permits, and so they have to spread the start season. So you're starting at Campo, the Mexico border, and if you're starting early March, or February, then you're going to get into snow. If you start late, in May, you're going to get into heat, for example. And so there's a suggestion, at least, that system could cause some problems, could increase risk. The PCTA tries to do a good job of what I call PSAR, preventive search and rescue, and getting information out to hikers. I can tell you I have talked to someone with the PCTA, and they do want to work on doing even a better job. So I think we'll see in the future some more innovative and maybe more assertive actions to try to help through hikers hike more safely.
What do you think is the best time of year to hike the PCT?
You have to,
what's your favorite? Let me ask that way.
Well, for me, I like August and early September, in the Sierra, but even in Washington. But that's section hiking. A through hiker can't just do it on the best time of year because they're having to fit it in 5.5, 6 months.
Yeah.
So it kind of forces them to deal with some weather that they might not prefer to.
Sure. Anything else?
Sure.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Andy, for being here tonight. Folks, the book is Trail of the Lost. It is a New York Times bestseller, and once again, I really, really cannot recommend it enough. Thank you all so much for being here, and for the folks at home, thank you so much for joining us. If you liked what you saw tonight, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. And if you're in LA, why not come on by? We do this every single week, and you can ask your questions from our live audience and meet our amazing speakers in person. That's going to do it for us here at the Adventurers Club. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time off the beaten path. Good night.